There are people in life you connect with, close friends, family. Sometimes because this connection is so intense, people just know things about the people they're close to. They know when their friend or loved one is sad, even if they're not physically with them. They know instinctively sometimes when they're facing trouble. I even know people who know the exact moment that a friend or family member died because that person appeared to them and told them. There are people in your life who connect with you, close friends, family. And sometimes part of that connection defies easy explanation. It's a joining in consciousness that points for a lot of us to a larger consciousness. As Christians, we point at that and call it Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God that connects us all. But as Paul acknowledges today in Acts, we've never been the only ones who experienced it. Acts 17 might be one of the most interesting passages in the entire New Testament because we see here the early Christians grappling with the reality of the Gentile world, and in this case, the Greek world. Greece, home of Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, and in the time of Paul, their philosophical children, the Stoics, the Epicureans. And we read that Paul was distressed about all of the idols he saw in Athens, but we have to temper this with the understanding that the understanding of religious art in Judaism was not shared by all of the world. For in Judaism, you simply did not attempt to make a representation of God. God was too great, too immense, too mysterious to be represented by something like, say, a golden calf, which was used to represent the god Baal. No, Jews only dared to build God a throne, so that God could sit in the temple and, in early days, travel with God's people. But of course, this throne, this Ark of the Covenant, was something that the Jews kind of grew out of as they came to understand that God doesn't just sit in the temple, God's everywhere. Now, yes, there might have been some simple folks in regard to these idols in Athens who got confused, who thought the statue of Zeus might actually be Zeus, or the same with Poseidon or Aphrodite, but not the people Paul is addressing today. Paul is addressing Stoics and Epicureans. He is talking to philosophers, really good people, really smart people, people who very much understood that God is not in a statue. Stoicism, by the way, is a really interesting philosophy. Who's everybody's favorite character in the original Star Trek? Spock, right? Spock's coming from a world where logic is held as superior to emotion. Those ideas that formulate Spock, they're really based a little bit in Stoicism. Except Stoics didn't think emotion was all bad. Their views were actually very close to the views of the Buddhists, and some Christian scholars, like John Dominic Crossan, feel the message of Jesus could be called a Jewish Stoicism. And get this, Justus Lipsius, there's a name I've been afraid to say for 3 days. Justus Lipsius in the 1500s began a revival of Stoicism coupled with Christianity. So these were really smart people Paul was talking with, good people, even wise, and they were always seeking to learn more. Probably because, like us, they sensed this connection between us. They believed in that connection, this thing we would call Holy Spirit, but they knew that they didn't know everything about everything. A knowledge perhaps best symbolized by an altar in Athens bearing the inscription, "To an unknown God." And Paul quickly names our God, the God of Jesus, as the person this altar belongs to. The God that created all, the God that is near, even when we're having trouble seeing it. The God Greek poets, according to Paul, declare Father, in that they say, we too are his offspring. And then Paul goes on to say, God has now appointed a righteous judge who will judge the world in righteousness, and God has shown him to be thus by raising him from the dead. And yes, then there's some scoffing. But from others, we will hear more about this. And from others, belief. But they don't scoff at the idea that God's not in a statue. They don't even scoff at the possibility that God has sent a righteous judge. It's the resurrection stuff that gets them, and why wouldn't it? It's a lot to take in at first. But some believe, and some are willing to listen some more. And in the end, Greece would become a stronghold of the faith. But why did they listen? These philosophers, these children of the great philosophers. I think because they realized this guy, Paul, he gets it. He understands something about God the way we understand something about God. The Stoics, by the way, thought of God as one. They considered the cast of characters in the Greek pantheon, those characters that entertain us so much in stories like Hercules, to be metaphorical. And while I'm sure Paul's statement to them, stop thinking of God as something that can be wrought by human hands and imagination, probably had more than a few of them rolling their eyes, they listened. Because while Paul didn't quite understand them, he still got it about God. There is something that connects us. We call it Holy Spirit. And it's the experience of that pulls on us, connects us, and draws us together. Even on those days when we're not sure what to believe. What I love about this passage is that Paul comes across as loving, kind, understanding, and misinformed. He preaches the good news, and the listeners listen because even though he's saying some things that make them roll their eyes, they recognize truth in his words. How much better would life be if we would all talk together like that? I know this much. I know I rarely, if ever, completely understand where another person's coming from, why they're saying what they say, why they feel what they feel. I make assumptions. And a lot of times my assumptions are wrong. But I also know we are all connected. Even when that connection feels far away. Even when someone turns and shuns that connection for a human reason like anger or hate or simply the inability at that point to have faith. And I know that when I concentrate on the connection, on what we have that's the same, when I speak to that, I do a lot better than I do with any set of facts I think are so important. In a world that just too often embraces meanness, in a world that needs to solve problems that require sacrifice, in a world where so many things seem unfair, we need to speak to the connection that joins us and speak in love. Because then our listeners will more likely forgive our missteps and they'll know we will forgive theirs. We need to speak to the connection that joins us. We need to speak in love because that will bring the kingdom of heaven to earth. Remember, we are connected. We too are God's offspring. Speak in love.